And hello and welcome back. You're not looking at the Mighty Dash right now, but at the mighty Neil Armstrong for a simple reason. This is a kind of special episode here, and the reason why I've got a picture of Neil Armstrong inside Apollo 11's command module up is because I wanted to spend a few moments flying an approach and showing you perhaps the most profound lesson I've ever gotten as a fake pilot and as a would-be real pilot, and I think maybe it's a lesson that doesn't get hammered home often enough, so I'm going to try and do it with an approach that everybody really likes. And the reason why Commander Armstrong is up there is because we are going to be flying, I'll show you right here, the fantastic expressway visual into runway 31 at LaGuardia. And the reason why I've got Neil Armstrong up here, and the reason why I've also got American Airlines retired Captain Warren Vanderberg up here, is because this particular approach, although it is a visual approach, lots of airlines build RNAV, LNAV overlays over this so that they can simply call it up in their FMSs or FMCs or whatever the case may be, hit a button and more or less either get flight director guidance or have the autopilot fly this entire approach for them. And I was curious to see whether the Dash had that in its capacity, and so I looked right here and I discovered that yes, there is a V31 approach for KLGA in here. And so yesterday I took a little proving run and I flew out on it, and if you look at it right here, you can see there's our initial approach fix, Apple, which is in the middle of New York Harbor. And let me just zoom out a little bit and show you. And so I looked at it and I said, okay, well, there we go. There we are. We're intercepting the localizer for runway 4, and then we are going to dials, and then we are going to runway 31. Now, I thought, erroneously it turned out, that it would be like this, which is you fly to dials, you look for the twin stacks, you look for the highway, you turn to 085, you fly out to Corona to Flushing Meadow Park, and then you make a long, curving 135-degree turn to final on 3-1 as you descend. And as it happened, it didn't do it right. Now, that brings us to, well, that certainly brings us to Warren Vanderberg, but primarily it brings us to Neil Armstrong. Neil Armstrong and Buzz Aldrin were on their way in the Eagle lunar module to Tranquility Base. Well, they didn't call it Tranquility Base until they landed there, but to a spot on the Sea of Tranquility, which is a flat area of the moon, and the autopilot was guiding them in, and they were running low on fuel. They were already confronted some computer errors, which they determined, and Houston determined, were okay to proceed, and they were fat and happy, and they were coming down, and they were within about 30 seconds, 45 seconds of both touching down on the lunar surface and B, running out of fuel. So they were hard on a bingo, and the autopilot was bringing them down, and Neil Armstrong looked out the window, and he saw that it was going to bring them down into a big field of boulders and craters. So he did what any self-respecting pilot would do, and that is he said, the hell with the autopilot. I'm going to fly the plane. I'm going to use my eyes and my senses and my instruments and the controls at my disposal, and I am going to fly this spacecraft to the point where it needs to be, keeping an eye on the fuel and on the time and on everything else, and he did, and the rest is history. The reason why we've got Captain Vanderberg up here is because if you do any YouTube watching, you'll know that a whole series of his seminars to American Airlines pilots was posted on there, and one of them He does an awful lot on unusual attitudes, which you can see. This seems to be an airliner in a relatively unusual attitude for an airliner, but not for a fighter jet. And one of these sessions focused on what he called children of the magenta line. And that is pilots who cease being aviators and essentially become button pushers. And the message of the seminar was know when to use the appropriate form of automation, know when to intervene, know when to look and to see with your other instruments and your sense as a pilot and the charts and everything else that the automation was going to put you in a very, very bad place, and therefore you should, in his words, go click, 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 click. Now, in his parlance, that meant pressing twice on the autopilot disconnect and pressing twice here with your right hand on the auto throttles, which in a Boeing airliner turns both forms of automation off. So what we are going to do is we are going to fly this approach as the FMS has it programmed. We are going to get to dials right here at 2,500 feet, and we are going to discover that, oh my goodness, it is actually going to put us in the very wrong place to do this approach, and we'll simply continue on manually. So in essence, what I'm going to do is I'm going to recreate my proving run from yesterday, in which I badly flew the airplane, had to do a missed approach, and ended up landing someplace else. The other complication is we're using some scenery for LaGuardia from an outfit called Drzwitsky Design, and it's lovely scenery, but it takes an enormous chunk out of the frame rates, and the other thing is it's obsolete. So all you New Yorkers, myself included out there, we will look down, and when we get to the point where we're doing that beautiful turn to final, we will see Shea Stadium instead of Citi Field, home of the soon-to-be World Series champion Mets. And so apologies in advance for that. Let me just quickly brief you up on what we got here as we look at a paused airplane. We have got a 045 as our heading, which is runway heading for the ILS we're going to fly to, which is for runway 4, which is right here. And we have tuned in the ILS for runway 4. The way the computer does is it tunes in the localizer for runway 31, and in fact, in practice, that's kind of useless because you're basically doing a turn to short final here, and there's absolutely no use for horizontal or vertical guidance by this point because you're supposed to be visual by about here, so all of that is immaterial. But that being the case, we will basically fly it this way, and we'll break off right here. We will determine that the autopilot and the FMS is not taking us where we want to go. We'll dial in 085 on the heading, and we'll probably just fly the airplane. Now, I have not yet, you should know, unlocked the secret to flying this approach in this plane. So we're sort of going to be groping our way there. Also, for our altitude, we will set, instead of 3,500, we will set 2,500, which is our circling altitude from dials. So before we get going, let's spin that down to there. And that's the point where we are going to, in essence, go click, 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 click. Also, you'll see we've got VNAV set up for a descent profile. We've got our top of descent there. And I have already 98% configured us for landing because I wanted to spare you that rigmarole. So with that, with Neil Armstrong as our co-pilot, I hope, with a strong wind coming out of about 300, so almost heading right down the runway, we are going to descend down into this muck and give it a go. So here we go. Our speed's okay right about where it is. Our TOD is there. I'll set up for a reduced noise landing. There we go. Our landing lights are on, our bleeds are in the right place, our ice protection is off, not needed. Our speed's creeping up a little. I'll set our V speeds, which are 122, and our V climb can stay where it is. We're 8 miles away from Apple, and we're about halfway to our top of descent. And let me just check our VNav profile. Four miles to go, yada yada, 1800, 2.85, that's fine, that's fine, that's fine. So we're going to get to dials, and probably we're going to decide, hey, wait a minute, this is not for us. But we'll see. Actually, our decision height is a lot higher. Look at 1,000 feet. That's Coney Island dead ahead of us, by the way. Somewhere out there, the Warriors are looking to come out to play. Okay, so we've captured VNav. We'll slow down a bit. As we go over the beautiful Verrazano Narrows Bridge, which is not named, by the way, after the Verrazano Narrows. This was called the Narrows before they named the bridge after Verrazano. They just named the bridge after both Verrazano, who was one of the many accidental discoverers of New York, and the Narrows, which is here, which separates upper and lower New York Harbor, and also Staten Island here and Brooklyn there, and somewhere down there Tony Manero in Bay Ridge, which is not to be confused with Bayside, which is not to be confused with Bensonhurst, which is right about there. Now the procedure calls for us to turn and fly right over Prospect Park, which is Brooklyn's main park and is beautiful. And the procedure actually says fly as close as practical to the park, ostensibly, I think, to cut down on the noise over residential areas. This is the Brooklyn-Queens Expressway. No, I'm sorry, this is the Belt Parkway, which loops around this way, and Kennedy is over there. So the Canarsie approach bends around that way, and the Express approach bends around this way, mainly so that one approach stays out of the other one's way. Alright, so we're squared up on 045. We are essentially tracking the localizer for runway 4 to LaGuardia, and of course we are not going to get there. Just slow down a bit. Nice hazy breezy day. That's Prospect Park right there. That is the Brooklyn waterfront. That's Red Hook. Somewhere down there some guy is mumbling about being a contender instead of a bum, saying he could have been somebody. Of course, he was Marlon frickin' Brando, so I don't know why he's complaining. That's Governor's Island right there. That little thing is the ventilation shaft for the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. I didn't even know they made batteries in Brooklyn. As a kid, I used to think that. That's actually the battery right there. That's where if you were a British ship, you would come and you would get your ass battered. Alright, so we're a little less than 6 from dials. We're looking for 2500. We've got alt select in. And we are going to get to dials, and what I'm going to do is I'm already going to dial in our 0 8.5 because I know we're going to need it. I'm not going to tempt fate here. So we'll dial that in, and then as soon as we hit dials, we'll go into heading select, and probably we'll just take it and fly it, and we will go by visual references. We'll fly around the highway. In real life, you look for a big-ass complex of red brick housing development, and that's where you can make your turn. In can come our first notch of flaps. I'm going to pull back the power just a little bit so that we don't balloon up. I am not going to bring the gear in right now, although I would ordinarily if we were flying at 4. I'm just going to let the speed bleed off a little bit, and we're 3 miles from dials, and that is Lower Manhattan. And that doesn't look too bad. The LaGuardia scenery is by Drzewiecki. Everything else is just stock. His scenery is really nasty on the frame rates, and he's really got to do something about that, and I expect he will at some point. Alright, so we're coming up on dials, and what we will do is we will hit heading select. There's Shea Stadium, aka Citi Field, right there, and we will be making for just to the right of that in a second. Alright, so there's dials. We are high. We will go into heading select. We will go into vertical speed mode, and we will initiate a relatively gentle descent to 1,000 excuse me, 1,000 feet. At which point, well, we'll make it 900 feet, at which point we should be turning final. This is the Long Island Expressway right there. We'll drop our gear, get fully configured. Down comes the power. The simulator pauses just as my neighbor in the apartment next door flushes the toilet. I don't think that has anything to do with anything, but there you have it. Alright, there's Flushing Meadows Park. Bring in our next notch of flaps. We will disconnect the autopilot, and we will start our carcasses down. And like I said, I haven't cracked the code for this approach yet, so I'm probably going to screw it up. I think that's the technical term. But we're going to look towards there. We're going to fly out to College Point, and there is runway 31. We're probably a little above profile at this point, so I'm going to nose down and let us pick up some speed. I'm going to double check that we're at flaps 15. We are. Gear is down. All our pumps and sumps and stumps and things are on. With the mumps. Sound like a Springsteen lyric. And I'm going to start our sweeping turn to final right here. That'll have to stand in for the apartment complex.
Plus 100.
And there's our
Minimums.
runway.
Minimums.
I'm going to tighten this turn. I'm going to bleed off speed. I'm going to hit standby and take off our flight director. That off our nose is the old Flushing Airport, which doesn't exist anymore, so I'm not even sure why it is on the scenery, but probably because it's so darn old. And look at that. Okay, so we're one white, we're one red. We can bleed off some speed, and we can basically fly a 45-degree, intercept 2 short final. And if I'm not mistaken, I think so far we're doing reasonably well.
500.
Probably the best way to do this is in one long, beautiful, flowing, sweeping turn, but I'm a pretty ugly cuss when it comes to that. Alright, there we go. And there we are. We're just above our V-app. Retrim a little bit. Got a hell of a crosswind. 16 knots coming across our nose. Just set up a little crab here.
100.
Look at that. Look at it pushing the nose back. Look at it fight.
50, 40, 30,
I'll let the crosswind pull out our crab right there. Going to land long.
20, 10,
There we go. And there we are. And we might even make the hold short. No, just boom, blow through it. Ordinarily they like you to hold short there, but being the outlaws that we are, we're going to screw that up. Anyway, welcome to LaGuardia, one of the sportiest, nicest, coolest approaches on Earth, and one that, at least in the Dash 8, is not yet fully modeled. But we can hope for an upgrade, especially in the Pro version. And in the meantime, I will just leave you with that. And always remember, if you don't like what the gadgets and the gizmos are doing, grab a hold of the yoke, grab a hold of the power levers, open your eyes, enjoy the flight, and make the airplane do whatever you want it to do. Anyway, pleasure doing this, fun little flight, and see you guys again soon. Bye-bye.